At a rooftop party, I unexpectedly ran into my sister-in-law, Lauren. Her face immediately flushed with anger. Without hesitation, she launched into a tirade, her voice sharp and cutting. Then, in a sudden burst of emotion, she grabbed a bottle of wine from the bar and struck me on the shoulder, right in front of everyone. To my shock, my brother Chris took her side, leaving me stunned and humiliated. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this go unaddressed. I was ready to report her to the authorities. But before I could make the call, something completely unexpected happened, changing the course of everything. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 34 years old and work as a marketing consultant. I live in a cozy apartment in Boston, Massachusetts. The city's energy, rich history, and intellectual vibe have always resonated with me, making it feel like home. My job is demanding but fulfilling. I help businesses grow. But the most precious part of my life has always been my relationship with my younger brother, Chris. From childhood, we were inseparable, a true team. He was the little brother I had always wanted. We spent countless days building pillow forts or pretending to be explorers in our backyard. As we grew older, our bond only strengthened. I believed nothing could ever come between us, not even when he started dating seriously. When Chris introduced me to his girlfriend, Lauren, I was thrilled. She was charming, funny, and seemed like the perfect match for him. We first met at a family barbecue. I remember Chris laughing with her, his eyes sparkling with happiness. "Emma, you're going to love her," he said beforehand, practically glowing with excitement. "She's amazing." That day, Lauren lived up to every word. She was warm and friendly, effortlessly winning over everyone around her. I was genuinely happy for him, believing he had found the one. But as their relationship progressed, small red flags began to appear. At first, I brushed them off, thinking I was just jealous of sharing Chris' attention. Over time, however, Lauren's biting remarks and condescending behavior became impossible to ignore. At one Thanksgiving dinner, I brought my signature pumpkin pie, a cherished family recipe passed down from our mom. When dessert was served, Lauren smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I thought I was in charge of dessert this year." Her tone was polite, but the words carried an unmistakable edge. I forced a smile, mumbling, I must have misunderstood. Her barbs grew more frequent and cutting. At a party, she laughed and said, "Still single, Emma? Maybe that's why you're always so uptight." The comment hit harder than I expected, and I felt my composure slipping. I tried to chalk it up to her quirky sense of humor, but the constant undercurrent of hostility left me drained. One evening, I confided in my best friend, Mason, over coffee. "Something's wrong with Lauren," I admitted, pouring out the frustration and hurt I'd been holding in. Nervously stirring my coffee, I confessed, at first, I thought she was perfect. But now, something feels off. "What exactly?" Mason asked, raising an eyebrow. "She says things that seem harmless on the surface, but it's like little jabs." "Like she's trying to wear me down," I replied, feeling my irritation bubble to the surface. "Have you talked to Chris about it?" Mason pressed. I hesitated, imagining how much Chris adored her. "I don't want to cause problems. He really loves her." "Emma, you can't just ignore this. You deserve respect, especially from your family," Mason said firmly. I nodded, knowing he was right, though the thought of confronting Chris left a knot in my stomach. Weeks passed, and Lauren's behavior only worsened. She interfered with my connection to Chris, deleting messages, hiding family plans. I felt like I was losing my brother, and the helplessness was unbearable. The breaking point came at a family dinner at our parents' house. I arrived early to help and chose a seat that seemed free. When Lauren walked in later, her face twisted with anger. "Excuse me, but that's my seat," she snapped. I blinked, confused. I didn't realize we had assigned seating. Her glare hardened, and the tension in the room became palpable. "It's always been mine. You should know that by now." The air grew thick with unease. In that moment, I realized this was about more than a chair. Lauren wasn't just asserting her place at the table, she was declaring war. The atmosphere was unbearable. "It's just a chair, Lauren. Let's not make this a big deal," Chris tried to calm her. But Lauren wasn't backing down. "No, Emma always tries to take everything from me. She's always trying to overshadow me." Her words hit like a slap. "I'm not trying to take anything," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. The room filled with an unspoken tension. I braced myself for the storm, unaware of just how much it would change my relationship with Chris. What followed was chaos. Her accusations echoed in my mind, shattering my belief that family was a safe haven. Later that night, Chris texted me, "Can we talk?" Lauren feels awful about what happened. I sighed, torn between anger and sadness. I wanted to reply with a sharp retort, but instead I wrote, "Fine. I want to talk too." We met that weekend at a sunny park, though it felt as if a cloud hung over us. Chris approached, his face tense. "I'm sorry about the other night," he began. Lauren didn't mean for things to go that far. I wanted to believe him, but the words came out heavy. "Chris, it's not just about that. It's the constant digs, the way she treats me." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I know she can be difficult, but she's under a lot of pressure. Can't we just avoid conflict?" Frustration surged through me. "Avoiding it isn't a solution, Chris. I feel like she's driving a wedge between us, and it hurts." His gaze softened, and he looked lost. "I promise I'll talk to her. Just give it some time." Weeks passed, but things only got worse. Lauren grew bolder. At a family barbecue, she sauntered over and smirked. "Still single, Emma? Maybe you're just too picky." Heat flushed my face. "I'm focused on my career," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "Sure, because that's going so well for you," she snorted, her laugh sharp and cutting. That evening, I poured my frustrations out to Mason at our favorite cafe. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as I whispered, "Being around her is like walking through a minefield." "Maybe you should learn more about her past," Mason suggested, frowning. "There has to be a reason she acts this way." I hesitated, uncertain. I don't want to invade her privacy. What if it makes things worse? "Sometimes, to protect yourself, you need to understand what you're up against," he said firmly. After much deliberation, I decided to investigate. It didn't take long. Mentions of toxic relationships, restraining orders, and broken friendships quickly surfaced. My stomach twisted. What had my brother gotten himself into? I told Mason. "Her past, it's complicated. It explains a lot." "You need to tell Chris," he urged. "He deserves to know the truth." That evening, I invited Chris over for dinner, hoping the warmth of home might soften the blow. "Thanks for coming," I greeted him. "I made your favorite, fettuccine alfredo." "Smells great," he replied, though his face was tight with unease. As we sat down, I took a deep breath. "Chris, we need to talk about Lauren." His expression darkened. "I thought we agreed to let things cool off." "I wish I could, but I've learned things you don't know," I said, steadying my voice. "Her past relationships, restraining orders, the rumors she's spreading about me. This isn't just about me. She could hurt you too." His face shifted as the weight of my words sank in. "That's a lot," he muttered. Before I could respond, a loud knock startled us. My heart raced. "Who could that be?" Chris murmured, heading for the door. I followed, a sense of dread building. When he opened it, there stood Lauren, her face a storm of anger and desperation. "We need to talk," she demanded. Chris glanced at me, torn. "We were just talking." She ignored him, her eyes fixed on me. "You're turning him against me." My pulse quickened. "I'm trying to protect you, Lauren." "Protect me? You mean control me?" She shot back, stepping closer. "I know your type, Emma." "Enough," Chris interrupted, his voice trembling. "Lauren, this isn't the time." But she turned to me, her words venomous. "You think you can just walk into my life and destroy everything." "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said firmly. "I want peace." "Peace?" Her voice rose, her anger twisting her features. "You're tearing us apart." Before I could react, she grabbed a vase from the table and hurled it at me. I stumbled back, feeling a sharp pain in my head. "Lauren, stop!" Chris shouted, his face pale with shock. I touched my head, feeling the ache spread as tears stung my eyes. "You can't keep doing this. You're manipulating everyone, trying to turn him against me." Chris stepped between us, his voice shaking. "This has to stop, Lauren. You can't treat Emma like this." Relief washed over me, but as I looked at Lauren, I saw the bitterness etched deep in her expression. The situation had spiraled beyond reason. Outside, the wail of sirens pierced the tense silence. Panic flickered in Lauren's eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered. Chris frowned, the air thick with unease. "Someone must have called the police." Moments later, uniformed officers stepped into the apartment. I stood frozen, disbelief coursing through me. One of them addressed Lauren directly. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." We received a report about an incident. Lauren's face drained of color, becoming ghostly pale. I didn't do anything. You're the one attacking my sister. Chris's voice trembled with emotion as he pointed at her. The officers exchanged concerned glances, making my stomach clench. We'll need statements from everyone involved, one of them said calmly. Gathering my composure, I began to recount the events, the aggression, her attempts to isolate me from everyone. As I spoke, Chris's face clouded with a mix of regret and disbelief. I never wanted things to get this far, Emma, he murmured quietly. But you mean to see how dangerous she is, I replied softly, hoping to break through to him. The officers stepped aside to confer, leaving Chris and me facing each other. I lowered my voice. Chris, please, face the truth. This is toxic. I'm afraid for you. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. I love her, Emma, he said, his voice wavering. I need time. Before I could respond, the officers returned. One of them spoke firmly. Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault. Lauren's eyes widened in terror, her face contorting with panic. No, this is a misunderstanding. She cried, resisting as they placed handcuffs on her wrists. I stood silently, watching her be escorted out, a mix of relief and sorrow settling over me. Turning to Chris, I saw his face pale with shock. I can't believe this, he whispered, his voice shaking. I know it's hard, I said gently. But her behavior isn't normal. She's been manipulating you, Chris. As the police car disappeared into the distance, reality finally began to set in. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath was devastating. Lauren faced charges and was eventually convicted. The strain took a heavy toll on Chris. Anger, betrayal, and bitterness gnawed at him. While he wrestled with his emotions, I focused on rebuilding our bond. Gradually, he started to see her true nature. Mason became my rock during this time. One evening, as we sat overlooking Boston's shimmering skyline, he took my hand. You're so strong, Emma. I'm proud of you, he said softly. Thank you, Mason. I couldn't have done it without you, I replied, overwhelmed with gratitude. Looking back, I realized how much I had learned about loyalty, resilience, and standing my ground. Despite the pain, I emerged stronger. Gazing at the city lights, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Life was something I could shape, and I was ready for whatever came next. Weeks after Lauren's arrest, the weight of what had happened still pressed heavily on our family. Chris kept his distance, processing the chaos in his own way. While I hoped time would bring clarity, I feared her absence would only deepen his guilt and grief. Then one evening, he called. Emma, can we meet? I need to talk, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. My heart quickened. Of course, let's meet at the park near your place. When I arrived, Chris looked exhausted. His shoulders sagged under an invisible burden, his face lined with worry. As we walked, he cleared his throat. Emma, I owe you an apology, he began quietly. I should have seen this sooner. I should have listened to you. Tears stung my eyes. Chris, this isn't your fault. You were in love, but love shouldn't blind you this much. He exhaled deeply. I feel like I let everyone down. You, myself. I've started seeing a therapist since all this happened. She's helping me understand why I held on to her so tightly. I was afraid of what letting go meant. Afraid of being alone. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You'll never be alone, Chris. I'll always be here for you. His eyes met mine, a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. I know, he said softly. And that's why I've made a decision. I'm filing a restraining order against Lauren for harassment and manipulation. It's the only way I can truly move forward. For the first time in months, his voice carried resolve. As we continued walking, I felt a glimmer of hope, too, for him, for our family, and for the strength we were finally reclaiming. I stared at Chris, stunned by his resolve. Are you sure? This is a big step. Yes, he said firmly. She has to face the consequences of her actions, and I need to move on, no more living in her shadow. It's time to let go. I wrapped him in a tight hug, a wave of mixed emotions crashing over me, pride and relief intertwining. I'm so proud of you, Chris, I whispered. With his decision, things began to change. Chris filed a restraining order against Lauren, accusing her of stalking, emotional abuse, and assault. The legal battle was exhausting, but for the first time in years, I saw my brother standing up for himself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. By his side were our parents, Mason and me, his unwavering support system. In court, Lauren's toxic behavior was laid bare. Testimonies from her past relationships painted a clear picture of her manipulative and abusive tendencies. The charm she had once wielded as a weapon was no longer enough to shield her. When the verdict came, the judge issued a permanent restraining order, cutting Lauren out of Chris' life for good. As the gavel fell, her expression remained stoic, but when her eyes locked with mine, they burned with seething hatred. A chill ran down my spine. Even in her defeat, I knew she wouldn't disappear entirely. It would be naive to think otherwise, but I was ready. I had faced her wrath before, and I wouldn't let it tear our family apart again. Chris, on the other hand, finally found freedom. Over the following months, I watched him rebuild himself. He reconnected with old friends, rediscovered his passion for painting, and focused on healing. Our bond deepened, and I cherished every moment spent with my brother. One evening, as we sat in a cozy cafe over steaming cups of coffee, Chris looked at me with quiet determination. "Thank you, Emma, for not giving up on me," he said. I smiled, my voice soft but firm. "That's what family is for, Chris. That's what we do." It took time, but harmony slowly returned to our family. Chris moved into a bright new apartment, far from the shadows of painful memories. He started volunteering at a local art center, finding solace in helping others. Our parents, once hesitant to intervene, became more supportive and involved, ensuring Chris felt valued and never alone. As for me, I poured the lessons I'd learned into my own life. I prioritized building healthy relationships and leaned on Mason, who remained my steadfast anchor through it all. Over time, our friendship blossomed into something more. One crisp autumn morning, as we strolled through a bustling farmer's market, Mason took my hand. "You know, I've always admired your strength, Emma," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I want to stand by you, just like you've always stood by others." My heart swelled with emotion. "You already do, Mason, and I couldn't ask for anything more." We walked together, feeling something new and beautiful unfolding between us. As I looked ahead to the future, I realized that a life once shrouded in darkness was now filled with light, love, and resilience. The storm had passed, and I was stronger for it. Life, with all its twists and turns, had given me the chance to rebuild, and I was determined to embrace every moment. Because true strength isn't in clinging to what hurts you, it's in letting go, healing, and fighting for the peace you deserve.